Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar in special times. And today we want to talk about how to manage inventory in these uncertain times. Give a small introduction just on who we are, how we can help, then talk a bit about our supply chain triangle and how inventory fits into that and what is the impact of the current crisis situation. And then Niels will take you through a couple of frameworks and tips and tricks on how we think we can help you with managing inventory. So for people who would not know us, we are Solventure. We are experts in sales and operations planning, S&OP. We are the channel partner of Arqiva in Europe, and our core business is basically implementing S&OP. Last week we had a webinar together with Huntsman Polyurethanes on how S&OP is a key process to navigate through the times of uncertainty I think most companies are experiencing today. If you want to know more, don't hesitate, reach out to us. A lot of us, our vision has been described in vision papers and so on, so we can explain more of that if that is helpful. How can we help? Last week we sent an email to our customers like next to the ongoing project work, we are helping customers, for instance, to build demand scenarios for Corona. A lot of us are facing today a lot of uncertainty. How is Corona going to affect our forecast? We do have special capabilities like linking demand to macroeconomic factors. We have the first data from China coming in. First we saw the hit there. Now we see kind of the revival or the relaunch of the economy. We can use that data also to do an analysis on what could be the impact in Europe or in the US. We can also help you to calculate supply or inventory scenarios. We could help you with interim planning. Some of you might face absence of people because of illness or family, or simply if you're in the food business, see extra work. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. Let us know how we can help you. Okay, main topic for today is inventory. And inventory is always a problem, and I think it will only be more relevant in these special times. These are a couple of snippets from different newspapers. Centrally, it's unfortunately in Dutch, but it's from the Belgian government, which was out of strategic stock of masks for people in hospitals. They had a strategic stock, but it wasn't stored in the right conditions, so actually they had to throw it away. So there has been a huge discussion on how we would get in extra masks to be able to protect people active in the hospitals. Just to give examples from very different sectors, and also Niels will come back later in the presentation about the difference between different types of stock. So strategic stock might certainly be an important question in these times. Niels will come back to that. I just want to give a broader context, and people who know us know that we typically work around that supply chain triangle of service, cost, and cash. Again, when you think about service, take a broad perspective and not just the on-time and full delivery performance, but also how narrow or how broad is the product portfolio? What is the order flexibility? Can any customer order in any quantity at any given time? Or do I impose certain restrictions? Maybe I have consignment stocks at customers. So when you think about service, really take the broad definitional perspective. Cost explains itself, and then inventory is of course part of cash. Cash equivalent for working capital. And in general, if I can reduce the inventory or if I can reduce my working capital, it is generating cash. So lowering the inventory from 100 million to 90 million creates 10 million cash on the bank account. In general, companies struggle. So just a couple of examples. We source in the Far East. Why do we do that? To reduce the cost, but because of the longer lead times, we might require more inventory. Marketing and sales can be very eager to expand the product portfolio. That's typically good for the service, but I risk introducing a long tail of products, so it will negatively impact my inventory position. In special times like these, supply chain managers may be asked to aggressively lower the inventory to free up cash. What I've seen is that companies at some point simply bluntly lower the safety stock. Well, if you lower the safety stock, the inventory will go down, but you will negatively affect service. And if you negatively affect service, typically you have all kinds of operational firefighting costs. So in our concept of the supply chain triangle, in general, we see that companies really struggle with balancing that triangle. And all of that has been described in my book, which is shown at the bottom right corner, Supply Chain Strategy and Financial Metrics. How does it come that we struggle with the balance? Well, according to me, it has a lot to do with functional KPIs and functional objectives within an organization. So your organization chart might look like the following. But if you are in marketing and sales and you step into the car into the morning, your first thought is probably, what is the top line? What is the market share? If you would be the VP of manufacturing, most probably your first thought would be about what is the efficiency, because the efficiency drives cost, or maybe efficiency and safety. If you are in purchasing or procurement, most probably it's about the spend, right? How can I reduce my spend? How can I actually buy more volume but for a lower cost? And I often say in many companies you have finance, which seem to be a bit disconnected from the rest of the organization, which also talk a language that nobody really understands. So finance talks about earnings per share, free cash flow, or net free cash flow. And if we take this type of organization chart and we translate it to the triangle, this is what we get. In general, we see that marketing and sales is primarily service oriented. So they primarily pull the service side of the triangle. In general, operations is quite cost oriented. So they are primarily pulling the cost side of the triangle here. And in many organizations, it's often finance who is concerned about the inventory, because inventory equals cash. And then finance will ask supply chain to lower the inventory. Basically, lowering the inventory allows to free up cash. And if in normal circumstances, we already feel a tension in this triangle, in general, I expect that when we look at how Corona will affect the businesses and how Corona will affect the triangle, my expectation is that as we speak, the tension in that triangle is increasing. And so when Corona hits the triangle, what could happen? Well, actually, this is something I have seen in the financial crisis, which is now around 10 years ago. but what I saw in the financial crisis is that companies were experiencing trouble. And certainly when we really were hitting the economic crisis, what you see is that, well, first of all, we are selling less because our customers are buying less. At the same time, many of our costs are fixed. So if we just sell less, but we do that with the same cost, our margins or our profits are rapidly eroding. And at the same time, if we want to keep some efficiency, we will keep producing. Maybe we have bought raw materials over the last 2 to 3 months. So margins are collapsing and profits are collapsing, while at the same time inventories are increasing. So that's what I saw in the economic crisis. And what I then saw as a reaction in some companies is that, okay, how do we address this situation? Well, first of all, of course, we will fight for the top line, right? We will try to sell anything we can get sold, even if the conditions are not perfect or the prices are not perfect. At the same time, we will say, okay, we need to save costs. So in operations, we will look at, okay, how can we be more efficient? How can we lower the cost? And in a crisis situation, certainly financial crisis, I also saw that finance was pushing hard on inventories because, yeah, okay, if you are earning less money or potentially you're even making a loss, but at the same time, you still need to pay your suppliers and you still need to pay your employees. And potentially your customers are paying later because they also have a cash issue. But if customers are not paying and you are selling less and the banks are not willing to lend any new money, where do I get cash? Well, then a favorite source of cash is certainly the inventory. So you want to lower the inventory. And in 2009, I saw that companies were really doing that in an unstructured, somewhat chaotic, improvised way. So as a result, I saw that different departments were basically taking different actions with different objectives. So most probably sales was fighting for every order in the market, right? If I look from an operations side, well, maybe manufacturing was looking to maximize efficiency. How do I maximize efficiency? Well, I want to smooth production and I want to maximize production runs. If I look at purchasing, well, if I want to reduce on the raw material cost, maybe I will commit to bigger quantities or potentially buy larger quantities. And if I'm the poor supply chain guy who needs to lower the inventory, well, I can try to lower the inventory by pruning the product portfolio, so by cutting SKUs which have less impact, but cutting SKUs at the time when sales is fighting for every order, that will be very hard, right? In 2009, I also literally saw that, okay, if we want to lower the inventory and save some cash, well, then we are going to stop production of goods we are not selling, right? But then try to stop production at exactly the moment that manufacturing is trying to maximize the efficiency to lower the cost per unit. Maybe I will try to reduce minimum order quantities, maybe minimum order quantities in purchasing for raw materials, but try to reduce minimum order quantities at a time that purchasing is negotiating with key suppliers to lower the cost. So certainly if we would get negatively hit and we are really getting into a crisis situation, well, this is, I think, what could happen, and this would be quite comparable to what I've seen in the economic crisis now around 10 years ago. So again, if balance in the triangle is already a challenge, my expectation is that when Corona hits the triangle, and certainly when we would get hit by an economic crisis, the tension in the triangle potentially would even become much bigger, right? And I want to launch a poll here. So my question would be, okay, do you see any of these? So you can vote. Do you see any of these? Yes or no? And maybe also in the questions box, try to give some comments like, what are you seeing? Yeah, so 10 seconds to close the poll. Okay, so let me close the poll and now share it. Sharing poll results. I hope you can see the results. I cannot easily see it myself, but 80% of the people says yes. So sharing poll results. Yeah. So normally you should see it. 80% of the people say yes, we see these type of things going on. So I have one reaction here. I have a second reaction. So please, indeed, what are you seeing? Try to share some of your experiences. So a first person here says, we see enormous orders depleting our stocks while we are trying to secure as much as possible raw materials. we are struggling to produce to cover the demand. So some companies, I think at this point in time, indeed are at the good side of the crisis, right? So it's the famous example of the toilet paper. I also see examples that if currently you are producing pasta, if you are producing pasta, you are selling most probably more than you ever did before. So you are basically depleting the inventory throughout the supply chain and fighting for any type of raw material you can get your hands out. I can easily imagine that. Second reaction here. First reaction is to ensure service even for increased cost. Unfortunately, there is already a big request for daily updates and extra ad hoc reports. So the second person says service before everything, even if it is at increased cost. It's not really clear whether that is to protect the top line or whether that is really an upside demand scenario. But in any case, service comes first, even if it impacts the cost and a lot of daily ad hoc reports trying to stay in control. Clients are increasing their stock to secure their productions, somebody says. Another person here says mostly short-term cost cutting. So that might be somebody who is not on the good side, but currently on the bad side of the corona effect. So if you are a supplier to the automotive has been shut down in China, I think, for 2 months. A lot of automotive is currently shutting down in Europe. If you are a supplier to automotive, you're not on the positive side of the corona effect. You are certainly on the negative side. So short-term cost cutting might indeed be the pressure you get. Cost pressure and more pressure to serve customers despite lower profitability. So profitability is going down and at the same time trying to deliver at a lower cost. So that almost feels like we want to give even better service and at the same time reduce the cost. That's really increasing the tension. Yeah, first person commerce, we are indeed part of the essential companies. Change for MTO to MTS, okay. That's probably challenging to change from make to order to make to stock at this period. Our customers do not adapt their EDIs. Well, we know they will not restart soon. So how do we get a good view on the true demand signal? That might also be a question here. We are seeing a bullwhip. On the one hand, some companies might see that their customers are demanding much more than ever before, basically because they are trying to refill their inventories and take some strategic stock. But it could equally likely be that 1 or 2 months from now, they are flooded with inventory and they will stop ordering altogether. So I think that's all things we can expect. Yeah, so somebody here from Doctors Without Borders, we get a lot of pressure to deliver as much service as possible, while at the same time suppliers are allocating their stock and they cannot deliver. So shortage in the supply market, that's what I read here, shortages, and trying to, as Doctor Without Borders, trying to get your organization supplied in a situation where there is a shortage in the market, challenging times. And maybe a last one here, reduce cost, improve cash position next month. So that might again be somebody who is more on the bad side, at least at this point of that corona aspect. So thanks for sharing those thoughts. So before I hand over to Niels, I think I now need to hide. Yeah? So pressure in general will increase. That's my expectation. Yeah. What we say in general and what we also explain in the book is that on the long term, you want to reach balance in the triangle, because service is the driver for top line, but I'm not only interested in the top line or growth, I also want to see a margin. Combining the top line with the cost gives the margin, and it's not only about the margin, but it's about what is the margin I generate over the invested capital. So what's the the EBIT over the capital employed, in financial terms, the return on capital employed, or the bang for the buck. So, but that's really the long-term objective. Yeah, I want to have this triangle in balance. What I do expect is that in many companies there will be a different short-term focus, right? So, if I'm in the food business today, if I'm a producer of pasta, my primary concern the current weeks will be being able to supply. So I will try to do my best to keep delivering service and satisfy the extraordinary demand I am currently seeing. Yeah? So my triangle will almost natively be out of balance. I will be willing to make extra costs, and if necessary, I will invest and pay more to get my hands on extra raw materials. At the same time, if I'm a supplier to automotive, if my sales drops with 30, 40, 50, or even 100%, yeah, I will have an aggressive focus on reducing the cost base, and to keep going as a company, reducing the inventory to free up cash, right? So depending on which side I currently am, the balance in the triangle could be completely different. Yeah? All of that is fine, yeah, because extraordinary situations require extraordinary measures. My only question to each of you would be just make sure that within the company it is a well-considered and a well-orchestrated decision. So if we fight for the top line, let's do that, but let's realize that that might have an impact on the cost or the inventory, right? Bluntly trying to stretch the triangle and pulling in each of the directions in general leads to chaos. It's not leading to better decisions or more impact or an orchestrated effort. So that's a general introduction. I hope that this triangle might be helpful also to you within your companies to have a different type of discussions within the company on where are we, where should be the focus, how will we balance the triangle over the next few weeks, and how could it potentially change when the market changes. So try to use this triangle to have your discussion within your company. And now I will hand over to Niels, who will basically take you through the rest of the presentation, and I will come back at the end of the presentation then to take some extra questions from you. So Niels, I'm switching you as a presenter.
Thank you for the presentation so far, Bram. Let me move on to the next part. So in this second part of the presentation, I'd like to discuss 4 things. So first, I'd like to discuss the different types of inventory that we typically have in a supply chain and their typical drivers. I'm going to present the Solventure framework that we've established by working with all of our clients these past 10 to 15 years. Then I'll move on to or give some pointers on what we can do for you on the short term, for example, by doing a single echelon inventory optimization scan. And I'd like to conclude by providing a few ideas or thought provokers for, let's say, ideas for more advanced inventory optimization on the longer term when things have quieted down. So first, the different types of inventory that we have. So the top layer is probably the most well-known layer, so it's called cycle stock. So cycle stock, simply put, this is inventory that we keep to satisfy demand between 2 consecutive production runs or 2 consecutive replenishments of the same product. Now, in sizing that cycle stock, you strike a balance between ordering costs or changeover costs and holding costs, of course. You can choose to only produce once per year. Then you have a minimal amount of changeover costs, but then your inventory will go through the roof. On the other hand, you could also choose to, for example, produce only once per week. Then you will have a lot more frequent changeovers, but then, of course, your global inventory is significantly lower. Now, the second layer is the safety stock layer, and this is something that is now becoming very important, let's say, during these uncertain times. So safety stock is basically used to cover variability or absorb uncertainty from the demand and from the supply side. Unfortunately, we do not have a crystal ball, so we cannot perfectly forecast what the customer demand will be, especially in these times. On the other hand, from the supply side, we know that there are many factories who are now either having a lot of excess capacity or are very capacity constrained. So this, of course, has an influence on the amount of safety stock that we have to keep in order to be able to still guarantee the service towards our customers. Then we have the third type of inventory, which is anticipation or build-up stock. So basically, we use this kind of stock to absorb foreseen imbalances between supply and demand. A typical example there can be if you're a swimming pool producer, then you know each summer you will observe a peak in demand. This is something that happens. You're sure that this will happen. So in order to anticipate on that, you can start building inventory in March, April, or in May. Then you have a fourth type of inventory. This is mainly driven by process efficiency or by the lead times. If you are a European company and you're sourcing a lot of materials from Asia, once the goods go on the boat, for example, they are on their way for 6 to 8 weeks. Of course, during that time, the inventory is blocked and it cannot be used for production or to sell. And then the last type of stock is strategic stock. Now, there is not really a fixed definition as far as I know for strategic stock. To me personally, this is inventory that we keep for uncertain but high impact events like the corona outbreak. This is not something that we typically model by using statistical models because of the low probability and say the high impact. It's rather a management type of decision or an SOP type of decision. Now for me, in this presentation, I'll focus on the optimization of safety stocks because this is something that we can capture via statistical models. Now, if I think about the difference or where do we draw the line between the two, an example could be that we say like, okay, if one or two factories are having, let's say, difficulties to supply one of our key components, then this is something that can be accounted for via safety stock. But on the other hand, if several governments in Europe decide tomorrow to shut down all private businesses, of course, if you want to account for that kind of scenario, this is something that you'd cover with more a strategic kind of safety stock. Now, this brings us to the inventory framework. So it has 4 main components. I do not, for the sake of brevity, I will not go to all the different building blocks, but I highlight a few key components. So people who have followed one of our demand planning or segmentation webinars, they know that we always segment our product portfolio. So we typically do this on 2 axes. So on the one hand, you have an ABC type of classification based on volume or on value or on margin, where we separate the fast movers from the slow movers. Then typically we have a second dimension, what we call the XYZ dimension, where we also segment based on the demand or supply variability. Now, why do we do this? The idea, and this will also come back further in the presentation, is for the fast movers where we have low demand and low supply variability. For those items, we know that it's relatively cheap to maintain a good service for them, and we know that they contribute a lot to the profits, or to the top line or to the bottom line of our company. On the other hand, if we think about C items with a high variability, we know that it's very expensive for those items to keep or to achieve a good target service level. But on the other hand, we know that they do not contribute a lot to our top or bottom line. So for these items, we want to lower our target service level, or we want to consider the option to convert them, for example, from make to stock to make to order items. Then on to the second phase. So we have the calculation of the inventory parameters. So this is the phase that I'll focus on in this presentation. So on the short term, I think single echelon inventory optimization can trigger a lot of benefits in these uncertain times, where you calculate optimal safety stock and lot sizing parameters. And then on the longer term, this is a bit more, the next step in supply chain maturity is then that you move on from a single echelon approach to a more multi-echelon inventory optimization approach, where you take a more holistic point of view when optimizing your inventory parameters. But more on that in a few slides. Then once we've calculated our inventory parameters, typically we do this, or typically the output of such calculations are time-independent lot sizes and safety stocks. Now, of course, we get, if we take those targets, we know, okay, safety stock requirement is 100 units, lot size is 200 units. We convert that from units into days of coverage. And then using the forecast that we typically get from the demand planning module, we convert that then and we project those inventory targets out into the future, which we can then use into our downstream planning processes. And then finally, in the fourth step, we have the monitoring step. Of course, we want to keep track of, okay, what are our actual inventory, what's our actual inventory on hand, how does this compare to the target inventory that we have established. We can measure this both in volume and in value. We could also focus on, this depends a bit on the industry, of course, but for some industries, for example, the chemical industry, it's very important to keep track of, for example, aging inventory or from slow moving and obsolete inventory. These are all the kinds of things that you want to track and evaluate in this monitoring phase. So on to the, let's say, first component or block that I'd like to discuss, which I think could provide a quick win for many companies during these uncertain times. So what we have done in the past, or what we've been doing for many years, is if you're looking for something that with a limited of effort gives you a good insight on what remaining potential still is for your company related to inventory optimization, we can perform a single echelon inventory scan. Now, what's the goal of a single echelon inventory scan? The first goal is typically to provide, or to be able to provide you with visibility on your current inventory levels, of course. Then once we've established visibility, we calculate our optimal inventory parameters. Based on that, if you calculate that on the most detailed level, you can already assess for the most important items, okay, are we over or under stocking according to the theoretical optimum, and get a bit of a first idea about what the potential working capital reduction could be. A second step typically then is to give some insight on service level sensitivity. So how much safety stock or inventory investment do we need to achieve a certain target service level? Typically, as a benchmark, we take, or this is what we observe is typically the benchmark or the current situation is that they have one flat service level target across the entire portfolio. Then we take this as a base scenario, and then we evaluate, okay, if we now increase our service level targets for the A items with low to medium variability, and for example, we start decreasing the service level requirements for C items with a high variability, what is then the difference in safety stock investment that we have? And then what, of course, is the impact on our top and our bottom line of adopting this more intelligent service level strategy. Then, of course, in the final step, we also assess the impact of various input parameters of the model. For example, what happens if our lead time increases or increases? What happens if our demand is going through the roof or actually plummeting due to the corona crisis? This heavily impacts the forecast error. So what does that then mean for our optimal inventory parameters? Now, to make it very tangible, what are typical deliverables? So we do a one-time analysis using the Arqiva inventory planner. We calculate the optimal safety stocks given the current service level targets. We calculate optimal lot sizes. Then we compare the current inventory on hand to the min and max target stock. So the minimum stock is the safety stock level. The maximum stock is equal to the safety stock plus your lot size. Then we try to quantify the impact of service level differentiation on your inventory requirements and on the top line of your company. Then we conclude by doing a sensitivity analysis on the final result, both in volume and in value. We typically create, let's say, 5 to 10 scenarios where we evaluate the impact of lead time increases or decreases, increases in variability, lot size increases, forecast errors that are becoming a lot worse or a lot better, and so on. Now, 3 specific screenshots that I'd like to show from the Arqiva inventory planner. So here you have the general overview where we give a summary. First of all, you can see our segmentation of the product portfolio. So using the ABC XYZ analysis. What you typically see, or what you see here So in green are the stage stock units. On top of the stage stock units, we have the lot sizes. Of course, the idea is that your current stock should be within, say, the top of the green and the top of the red bar. So this already gives you a first idea, okay, for which items are we understocking and for which items are we overstocking. One thing you immediately notice here, for example, is that, and this is what I've said in the beginning, for C items with a high variability, it can be, you typically need a lot of safety stock if you want to achieve a high target service level. And this is also what you see here in the report. Now, of course, this was the aggregated results. You as a user, you have full flexibility to, let's say, also drill down into the more detailed level. So all the calculations are run on the material location level. You can assess, okay, what are the stage stock values and volume? What's the cycle stock in volume and in value? How are my current stocks comparing to that? Are we under or overstocking? Of course, you have flexibility with respect to coloring rules to make it really visible or provide easy or allow for easy analysis. Now, this brings us to the last screenshot that I wanted to show for this is, and this is what I think the most interesting. So one of the native capabilities is that we easily can create different scenarios. Now, for this client, we started from the base scenario. Now, in this base scenario, we simply have a flat service level target of 95%. Now, we made several tests. Again, you can see that it's native to Arqiva that we compare both in volume and in value. First, we wanted to assess, okay, if we would globally lower our service level from 95 to 85, what would that be the impact on our target stock? Of course, you see that if you reduce your lead times or you reduce your lot sizes, this decreases the target stock. On the other hand, if the lead time increases, we know that the safety stock is increased and that thereby, consequence, the target stock also increases. Now, the last scenario here is actually the most interesting one. So, or one of the most interesting. So, in this scenario, we increased the service level for the A items with low to medium variability from 95 to 98%, and we decreased the service level target for the C items with high to medium variability to 90%. And for the B items, we kept the the service level stable at 95%. So what you see here is that we were by calculating or running through this scenario, we were able to show that, okay, for if you give a higher target service level or you increase the service level target for your products that achieve the most of your profit or the most of your revenue for your company, you can see that you even need a smaller safety stock investment or target stock inventory investment in comparison to just achieving a flat target service level of 95%. This is, of course, a scenario that you want to migrate to, that you start from a base scenario of a flat service level target and move on to a more, let's say, intelligent or more a scenario that focuses more on the return on capital employed by differentiating your service level targets and by segmenting your product portfolio. So that's what I wanted to show on the short term. I'd also like to give a few pointers on what we can do for you on the long term. I see I only have 5 minutes, so I'll try to be quick as possible to leave some time for questions. So multi-echelon inventory optimization, of course, we know that in real world supply chains they are rarely single echelon, they are almost always multi-echelon. In order to explain the concept, I'll use this battery supply chain from MIT. Now, in the supply chain, we make batteries. Batteries consist of several different raw materials, labels, nail wire, separators, and so on. These bulk batteries, they are then packaged according to 3 different types of packaging. Then we have the finished goods, which can be stored either in the factory or in the central DC. And these packaged batteries are shipped to one of the or to 3 different warehouses that we have available in the US. Now, linking back to, if we look at the inventory that's present in the supply chain, we can look at this from 2 dimensions. On the one hand, you have the type of inventory that we have. And on the other hand, we have the different echelons. So we're looking at a 4 echelon system where we have raw materials, intermediates, finished products in the central DC, and finished products in the regional DC. Now we know that raw materials is more purchasing driven, the intermediates are production driven, and these 2 are more distribution journey. Now in this presentation, because Corona mainly impacts the safety stocks, I want to talk about multi-echelon and safety stock optimization. So the question is, we know that safety stocks helps us to buffer against uncertainty, both from the demand and the supply side. Now the question is, where in our supply chain or in which echelon should we buffer against this variability? Should we buffer on all the echelons? Should we buffer on only one echelon, or should we buffer on multiple echelons? Now, single echelon inventory optimization basically assumes that for each of these individual stocking points that we have, we assume that each stage individually buffers for himself. And basically it buffers against supply, for example, node 16 or stocking point 16, buffers against the supply variability for the lead times from its components, so to speak, but also buffers against the demand variability that's propagated from the customer's here all the way up to the factory. Of course, and this is rather intuitive. Yeah, okay, if you keep safety stock at all these different stocking points, of course, your safety stock is going through the roof. Now, what multi-echelon does is basically it takes a more holistic kind of view at the network, or a company-wide view at the network, and says like, okay, rather than individually buffering or individually allocating safety stocks to all those different stocking points, we're going to look at this from a system perspective. We know that there's demand variability at the most downstream echelon, and we know that there are several supply chain there are several supply lead time variabilities that occur between the more upstream echelons. Now, the thing is, we know from simulation that if you want to achieve a certain target service level here at the customer at the most downstream echelon, we know that even if the upstream echelons would decide to keep safety stock, an infinite amount of safety stock, still, if the regional DC places an order on central DC, the order will virtually immediately be ready to, and will always be, let me put it differently, there will always be material available for the replenishment, because it keeps an infinite amount of safety stock. But despite this infinite amount of safety stock, you still have some lead time variability here, and you still have the demand variability. So whatever configuration you choose, you always need at least some degree of safety stock at the most downstream echelon. And now this is where the multi-echelon inventory optimization models comes in. They say like, okay, it's not necessary to buffer these uncertainties or these variabilities at every echelon or at every stocking point, but just allocate most of the safety stock at the most downstream echelon, because you have to put safety stock there anyway. So it's better that you try to buffer all this variability only at one point. As long as the safety stock is high enough here, we will have no problem with satisfying the customers, and then it doesn't matter if some supply disruptions occur upstream. Then to wrap up, of course, we can simulate this on we test this on the battery supply chain. If you look at the blue bars, we see the single echelon solution, which proposes to keep safety stock at each of the different echelons. We see that the multi-echelon inventory solution significantly increases the safety stock at the most downstream echelon, but we obviously or visually already can see that the increase that we need here in safety stock is a lot smaller than the global decrease that we can achieve in the system. So this is one example that nicely illustrates the let's say the power of multi-echelon inventory optimization that can further help you to lower your working capital. Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted to share today. I'll give the word back to you, Bram.
Okay, thanks, Niels. If people have to leave, in the Corona times, we try to give more frequent webinars, but we try to keep them relatively short. If you have to leave, thank you for attending. But if there is still questions, we are still happy to take 1 or 2 or 3 questions. So we try to give an idea of what's the broader context. Maybe you can use that triangle to come to a to organize a debate within the company. Niels has shown, okay, if you really need to lower the inventory, try to do it in a clever way. Single echelon techniques can help. And then more generally, okay, if you need to structurally lower it, also try to take that multi-echelon perspective into account. I have a question here. We are now in survival mode, but my worry is about the period after Corona. We are over shipping with biases of -20 to -50% in certain BUs, but consumption will not change, of course. The million-dollar question, therefore, is what will our demand be in 2 or 3 months? Do we assume consumption flat and we forecast a mega dip to compensate, which will allow us to restore stocks? If they will continue, we will not have the room to restore our stocks. So I think, yeah, it starts with a good view on the demand, and what we are doing for some customers is helping them to build better demand scenarios. And it could be that either you are seeing a dip or either you are seeing a peak, right? And what we have certainly done is, first of all, look at historical comparable crisis to try and analyze what historically has been the impact of a crisis period on your specific business, and by how far there has been some kind of overreaction in one way or another way. And analytics speak because there is a lot of emotion, and if emotion is, let us say, what makes the decisions, it will always be overreacted. So certainly doing analysis, doing analytics, also looking at related factors, demand drivers, including external indicators in your forecast. I think that's what at least comes to my mind. Other questions? What's your method of calculating safety stock? I think Niels will be happy to explain in more detail. Probably one-on-one. There is, Niels is finishing his PhD in the topic. There is different methods to calculate, accounting for different type of variabilities. I think in general, what we see is that companies are calculating safety stocks in very simplistic ways. And the message Niels has tried to bring is that if you would be obliged to lower your inventory, make sure that you have the best possible calculation available, because a better calculation simply leads to a more realistic target. And if you need to lower the inventory, then you really want to lower it to a level that is the best possible guess. Any tips how to distinguish between a permanent consumer loading versus a peak followed by a dip? Well, it's like a promo. So I think if you look at the cannibalization of promos, what you do is analyze history and use analytics to show to people that what we are seeing now historically has been followed by a dip afterward, because people, your customers, basically have overstocked, didn't foresee that the demand was only temporary, and basically like a promotion, there is a cannibalization effect either in the period after on or either on other products. So these are some things that come to mind. If you would still have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thanks a lot to all for attending. So in this Corona period, we will be doing webinars on a more frequent basis. On the one hand, to also stay in touch with all of you and feel what your struggles are, and to see where you are currently in dealing with that Corona challenge. And at the same time, also, we try to keep sharing knowledge and experiences and best practices, so that hopefully, if we use our common intelligence, that we will all make the best possible, let us say, result out of this. So thank you all, and hope to see you back soon.